You're listening to Binjang 91.5 and it's time for Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson. I'm your host, Tony Graham. G'day, Matthew.
Good afternoon, Tony. Good to chat to you again today.
Well, it always is. Now, first thing is Google has ended plans for a smart city in Toronto. We've heard about smart cities before, haven't we?
I'm really disappointed about this one. I was actually looking forward to going to Toronto once this was all set up because I love the idea of building a city up from the ground. I've actually got a brother over in Canada, so it was going to be a good excuse for me to go and visit my brother, go and have a look at this wonderful city. It was when we say a city, it was a 12-acre component of Toronto that was really being built up from the ground up, everything based around a digital city. So basically they were building everything in they possibly could. So the garbage system was going to be automated. They were going to have autonomous cars that were running along certain tracks in the actual roadways and basically making it all these wonderful ideas that have been tried at different spots around the world. The idea was, let's build them all into one city. Can we make a more sustainable community? Can we have a community that really addresses climate change at its very core rather than, if you like, retrofit a city? And it's probably the same as a builder with a house. You can go back with a house and retrofit a whole range of smart devices, but building your house from the ground up with all those things built in, all the sensors you might need, all the information to collect data on the house is much better. And that's what they were doing with the city. Air quality sensors, collect data on what traffic was going where and how much energy all these different components would be used. Even cycle lanes that were heated. I love that idea. I mean, I've ridden over in Europe on different cycleways, and one of the things that amazes me is in winter, they're still just as busy as they are in summer. And I get a bit cold when I'm used to good old temperatures like we have out here.
Yeah.
I rug up and I'm riding along beside people on these cycleways that look like they're out for a summer ride. So heated cycleways, I love that idea. But unfortunately, the whole thing, for the moment at least, has been scrapped, and they've certainly quoted COVID-19 challenges as part of that. To make this city viable, to make it economically viable, they needed a whole range of things to work right for them, and obviously COVID-19 was not what they needed at the moment.
Yeah, that's a pity. Now, do you know of any smart cities anywhere in the world, Matthew?
There are some, again, retrofitted smart cities. Singapore certainly has some little components that they're doing with some smart cities. So there are some little hotspots, if you like, of challenges that have been met with smart solutions. But this was the first one that I know of, at least, that was going to be built from the ground up, from the very core, with as many smart components as possible. And I think that would have made it much better. I mean, we all see work that's being done over the years around our community where they've got to dig up roadways just to lay an extra pipe or put NBN data cables in or whatever it might be. And there's a lot of work to go and take what's already there and retrofit it. But if you've got a 12-acre plot of dirt and you can start working with that from the ground up, I think that's a really exciting concept. But unfortunately, didn't quite come to fruition this time.
Yes, I remember a similar proposition for Adelaide. Would have been about 20 years ago, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't remember hearing that one.
They didn't call it a smart city. It was a tech city or something else.
Yeah, okay.
And it just never came to fruition.
Well,
now,
let's face it, in Australia we have enough land. We probably could dedicate a bit of land somewhere around our country to build a smart suburb even, or a smart component. So again, we might look at more of this. You're always looking for the positives out of COVID-19. There are so many negatives, obviously, but maybe at the other end of this, we might look at technology in a different way in how it can solve problems for us.
It surely will, Matthew. Now, the toll group has suffered a second ransomware attack this year. That's a big problem for them.
It is a big problem for them. Pretty much the last week, anyone that's a toll group customer, pretty much the last week, they've probably received no freight at all. And unfortunately for the toll group, they were hit earlier on in the year by a ransomware attack. And of course, a ransomware attack is one where someone attacks your system from the outside and basically either says, we're going to release a whole range of information. It might be a whole range of client information, for example, or information that's private and confidential unless you pay a ransom. Or they might just shut down your entire system and say the damage to your business on a daily basis might be X millions of dollars. Then you just need to pay me whatever price they name, and then we'll let your system continue to operate. And of course, the same with any ransom, whatever type of ransom attack happens, whether it be an IT ransomware attack or when we see humans taken as ransom or things that you might see over the years that have occurred, paying money to someone who is basically carrying out a ransomware attack probably encourages them to continue on doing it. And I don't know about you, Tony, but I don't know that I have a lot of trust for someone that does this. So when someone says, please pay me X millions of dollars and I'll let your transport system work again, I don't know that paying those millions of dollars would make me feel like the system was going to be back up and going again immediately, because who knows what they do. They might disappear. They might say, well, sorry, we've got that. Now we'll get some more out of you. Thanks very much. Or you make this a weekly payment.
Right.
So I think Toll is taking the right approach. They're saying we're not paying anyone. They're working with Australia's cybersecurity unit. They're basically isolated their IT systems and basically rebuilding that. And again, I suppose we're not all Toll systems, but for all of us, we can all be subject to this sort of attack. I've seen individuals' computers are attacked with ransomware attacks. So whether you're just one individual computer or whether you've got an organisation with thousands of computers, the critical part here is make sure security is a high priority, but also backups. And that's the most important thing for an individual user. Backup, usually if you said to someone you're going to lose what's happened in the last day, photos you might have uploaded or some invoices you might have done, you could probably live with losing a day as long as you've got a backup you can go to that's an offline backup from the day before. And that's a really good defence against ransomware, but obviously having some security in place as well. But look, Toll will get through this. They've gotten through it once before, and hopefully people keep increasing their security and stop some of these ransomware attacks, not by the people being stopped themselves, that's going to be a tough one, but by making systems secure enough to stop it.
Yeah. Well, it's beware, all those computer users out there, and we're all computer users.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
Yep.
Now, Spot the Robot is reminding park goers in Singapore to keep their distance from one another. It sounds like a dog more than a robot.
It's a robot dog. Is it a dog robot or a robot dog? I'm not sure.
Or is it a dog of a robot? Who knows?
Well, hopefully not. Boston Robotics have been doing some great work, and I remember a video from a couple of years ago now where Boston Robotics had a robot that was the first one that could actually open a door, a normal door, despite the fact that they had some humans there pushing and shoving and moving that particular robot out of the road. And so they demonstrated just how far their robot technology had come. They've now got Spot the Robot, and Spot the Robot does a range of things, but obviously Spot existed before the coronavirus came along. And Spot is now doing a whole range of things across the world. There's different versions of Spot. But in Singapore, Spot roams around the park or various parks and just talks to people and says you shouldn't be out together. Spot's also capturing information, and the Singapore government has promised that it's not capturing individual information. It's just capturing information about the number of people that are out in the parks, just to get an idea, are there 10 people in the park or are there 1,000 people in the park? Well, let's have Spot go out there and do some counting with some cameras. But more importantly, just remind people, keep a safe distance, you shouldn't be in the park, those sort of things. So they've started a 2-week trial. It's just started right now. I think it started yesterday, actually. And that started, and after that 2-week trial, they'll decide whether or not it's been an effective tool and then maybe roll it out across more parks in Singapore and maybe have it going on a semi-permanent basis until we get through the main part of COVID-19.
Yes. Well, this sensing technology and distancing technology is becoming more and more important. And as a matter of fact, the National Health Service in the UK has revealed source code behind their contact tracing app. Now, the question is that a better app than what we've got, do you think? Anyway,
Well,
just go through that, Matthew.
There's a lot of argument around that, and one of the things that's a bit frustrating with the Australian app is that they haven't released the source code. They've promised to release the source code, and people with some privacy fears are obviously going to feel much more comfortable if the source code is released and some independent organisations can have a look through that source code and say that, yes, it is doing what the government said it was doing. At the moment, we've just got the government's word for the fact that it's not using GPS and not recording individual movements, etc. And look, I think that's all correct, but a lot of people would feel more comfortable if someone independent had a look at that. Now, in the UK, they've released the source code, so that's making people feel more comfortable. And they've actually targeted the Isle of Wight. So essentially, they haven't rolled out across the entire UK their contact tracing app yet. What they've said is, we'll try it on the Isle of Wight. It's not an experiment. It's basically being rolled out there first. Let's really work on it and solve some issues, if there are issues, on a smaller sample space before we roll it out across the entire UK. Now, whether the Aussie system is better or the UK system is better or the dozens of systems around the world are better, there's a lot of argument about that. And part of that argument is really about the centralised versus decentralised system. Centralised is that the information is collected back to a central server farm, and then that's the server farm that's responsible for notifying users if they have been in contact with someone. The decentralised system is really based on the individual phones retain that data and using those to do the trigger. And again, there's argument about which system is...
that's what we've got, isn't it?
Well,
decentralised one.
Interesting. We started off with centralised. So that was the concept initially, was centralised, but we're moving over to decentralised in terms of the way that works at the back end. And of course, as we know, our system, even though it's been downloaded and people are registering, it's not actually operational yet. They're doing some testing with it. They're trying to make sure it's right. But if someone comes in contact with someone that's actually had the app installed and is now confirmed as having coronavirus, that actually doesn't trigger them yet. And again, this is a bit of discussion in the Australian IT environment that it's out there, people are supposedly using it and supposedly feeling better about it, but it's not actually operational yet. But across the world, that's the big argument, centralised, decentralised, which way should we be going? And of course, Apple and Google are weighing into all of this, and they're giving their opinion about which is the best way to do it. And to me, there's still a bit of frustration from an IT perspective that you've got lots of people reinventing the wheel around the world. Lots of different governments around the world are creating their own system, when surely companies like Apple, Google, surely some of those large multinational organisations are better placed. And when it comes down to us getting back to some international travel, it seems a bit pointless that I've got my Australian contact tracing app installed and then I travel over to New Zealand, for example, and they've got a different app that they use. Well, if I come into contact with someone there, it's not going to be able to notify me because they're not talking about different countries actually being able to communicate between those systems that they've all individually built. And that's where some of those larger organisations that are already multinational, you had something on built by a Google/Apple sort of system, then you would travel anywhere in the world and that contact tracing would still work. Now, I understand some people are concerned about international borders and all the rest of it, and at the moment they're just worried about their own countries. But if you look at the big picture, surely that would make more sense to me. And I suppose I'm looking from an IT perspective. I'm not looking about it in terms of countries and what agreements might need to be in place among a range of countries. But that would make more sense to me. But anyway, the NHS, they've got their app out there. They've released the source code. People have pored over the source code. They're quite comfortable. Independent organisations quite comfortable with it. At the moment, small sample. Let's see how they go on a bigger picture. In the meantime, we're still downloading an app that isn't really being used.
Interesting. And you've been listening to Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson on Binjang 91.5, and I'm your host, Tony Graham. Stay tuned next week at 20 to 10 for the next edition. And now it's back to the great music and community information on Binjang.
Talk to you next week, Tony.
Thanks very much, Matthew.